Alright, as aging occurs, we begin to crave more meaningful conversations while also being shown respect. If communicating with the elderly is not done often, it can be seen as a difficult task. Keeping in mind the following general aspects, things to avoid, and tricks, conversating can be easier and more enjoyable for everyone. Personally, I consider myself raised around the elderly. My mom brought me to work with her whenever she couldn't find a sitter, which ended up being pretty often. So as soon as I learned I could get a paycheck out of being there, I jumped right on the opportunity. I've now been a volunteer and employee the past 4-ish years at the same company my mom works for. And I've been around the environment at least 10, so I know the in and outs. First is general aspects. One we may not put much thought into is vocal cues. This includes your pitch and tone, volume, and rate. Yes, the elderly can be hard hearing, but you don't need to yell at them. And don't speak too fast because it can take them that extra second to understand what you're explaining. This brings me to nonverbal cues, which also have just as big of an impact. This includes your facial expressions. Try to always have a smile on your face, and then your gestures and appearance. If a resident or an elderly person is walking, take the time and show them respect and don't rush them. They will pick up on the energy you give off and treat you normally the same way. Mindset is another vital factor. Make sure you go in with no negative attitude, good intentions, and simplifying and repeating if needed. These are either your family or others' families, so treat them with the respect. Next to make sure of is knowing what to avoid. There's a term called elder speak where you do not treat the elderly as if they are adults, but rather children. This is when you use a slow speaking rate, high pitch, and use nicknames such as sweetheart or honey. This proven by psychology, if you do not use the skills of the aging, they will lose them. So if they're not putting together puzzles, opening their own dresser drawers, putting on their own socks, they might forget those skills. Which ties straight into babying. Babying is very similar, but it's when you show excessive physical affection, when you're always hugging them, feeling the need to touch them, or even giving kisses on the forehead. They are their own person, and they know what they are doing. An obvious one that you'll want to avoid is upsetting. Do not make them feel rushed. Listen to their needs, and do not make their disability feel like a burden. Do not make their disability feel like a burden. If they need a walker, go get the walker. If they need to use the bathroom, bring them to the bathroom. At all costs, do not make them relive negative life events. The loss of a loved one and pet is a huge one. If someone is asking for their wife who passed away years ago, just tell them that they are taking a run to the store or a walk. And that goes for victims of abuse and veterans. Lastly is some tips and tricks. First is how you can calm them down if they are upset. Redirect the conversation, and if that doesn't work, you can reapproach later. Give them 10 to 15 minutes. Show understanding and go with the flow, especially dealing with patients or the elderly with dementia. They can see some things that aren't there, and they can tell you some pretty wild stories. So just agreeing with them and moving on is the best way to handle that. My next points relate to how to make the person happy again and lift the mood. Focus on the positives and show interest in their hobbies. I once sat through a whole conversation about NASCAR, not knowing a single thing they were talking about. You also want to ensure comfort in the task and respect their boundaries. Do not make them do anything they do not want to participate in. In general, if these aspects, things to avoid, and tricks are implemented, it will make such a difference in both the care provided and the communication. As a caregiver, the number one priority is always both the condition, physically and mentally, of the elderly. Knowing how to communicate with them effectively will benefit everyone.